Okay, so yesterday I decided to leave a long post on a Facebook group that I'm a long-standing member of, and I've quoted it a few times here, or rather mentioned it a few times here, and it is the British and Global Muslims for Secular Democracy. Um, the admin, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, is Dr. Shaz Mahbub. He has been the admin of that for a number of years now. Anyway, I've been active on the group. It's a group that promotes secular democracy. It's a group that opposes Islamic fundamentalism, but also is Muslim led and opposes anti Muslim bigotry. So, um, I don't want to get into all the inner sort of things going on in the group because that would be perhaps inappropriate for a YouTube video. But suffice to say, it's an interesting group. You know, it keeps me engaged. I contribute to it almost every day. Sometimes there's a few, bit of back and forth that I get a little tired of, but you get that, I think, in every group. Um, I mean, sometimes it just gets into, certain childish point scoring, but more often than not, there's intelligent adult debate going on there. So I decided to make this post just to encompass a lot of the things that have been brought up. Regarding these issues because the group has attracted all sorts of people. It's attracted atheists, it's attracted Islamists, it's attracted secular Muslims, it's attracted all sorts of schools of thought. Some of them I respect, some of them I've no time for. But the point is, it's generated a wide range of viewpoints. So I want to kind of talk about some of the things I brought up in the post because I'm pleased to say what I've done is I tagged a lot of members just at random, not just people I'm friendly with, people I've disagreed with, just a random selection of members in order to kind of get the debate going. 103 comments so far in relation to my post, so I'm quite happy about that. I mean, I'm happy because I spent a fair bit of time writing it, so I'm happy that it did indeed generate a bit of debate, mostly positive responses. A lot of people were saying they appreciate I took the time to lay out those thoughts. There were some opposing views as well, which is fine. I don't want an echo chamber, but it's those opposing views that I thought would be an interesting sort of thing to bring up here. Now, just to be clear, I'm not talking about, oh, well, they said this and now I'm going to talk about them. I'm just talking about the sort of issues that we're bringing up. So I'm not saying verbatim, right? I'm not saying they said this and they're wrong. I'm just talking about the general theme of what some people brought up. Um, because I think it really needs to be scrutinized a little bit. And it's this. There are, well, let me just say this. I believe it's very important to be transparent on these things. Um, if you feel offended by this video, there isn't really much I could do about that because I can't word it any other way, without overly sanitizing the subject matter. And I am a believer in saying what's on our minds, as much as possible, as broadly as possible. That's my understanding of freedom of expression. That you say that people be allowed to say what they want in the broadest way possible, short of advocating violence. Um, so some Muslims have this idea in their head, or they promote this narrative that because there's some examples of anti-Muslim bigotry in Western countries because there are things that they don't like. That somehow equates to widespread anti-Muslim bigotry or widespread persecution, even. One Pakistani member, she's come up a number of times. She pretends to be a liberal and she pretends to be, I'm not going to name her because that wouldn't be fair, when she can't reply to this, but this particular individual pretend to be a liberal and should pretend to believe in human rights and believe in all these values and she'll condemn terrorism, But when it comes to Islam, she seems to take a particular attitude towards non-Muslim members who condemn Islamism. And her narrative, and I've seen this many, many times from certain Muslims, is we are being picked on. Islam is being picked on. Now, that idea is utter nonsense, in my opinion. And this is why. Of course, you will find examples in this world of Muslims being actually seriously persecuted. An example is Uyghurs in China. Another example is the Rohingya people in Burma. Although, in the case of Burma, there has been fighting on both sides, so I'm not going to say the Rohingyas are 100% innocent and the Burmese are 100% guilty. Um, that it's not that simple. Nevertheless, I do think there has been serious persecution of the Rohingya people. Um, the Palestinian-Israeli thing I feel is a lot more complicated, so I'm not including that for this particular video. But if you're of the school of thought that the Palestinians have been persecuted, okay. Um, there was also the anti-Muslim pogrom in Delhi recently, right? So you will find examples of Muslims being persecuted. But here's a very, very important point or counter to that narrative, and it's that a huge amount of persecuting in this world is at the hands of Islamic theocracies, is at the hands of Islamists, not just governments, but individuals in societies. And my simple question for those Muslims who claim that they are persecuted in the West is this: can you freely attend your mosque? Can you freely read your Quran? Can I, as a non Muslim, go to a conservative Islamic country such as Iran or Pakistan or Afghanistan, freely criticize Islam or freely even question Islam? Never mind criticizing. Can I even question it as a non Muslim? The answer is very clearly no, because if I did, one of several things would happen. I would either be accused of blasphemy and arrested and charged with whatever penal code that comes under in that particular country. I would be subject to an angry mob who wants to tear me limb from limb for offending the Prophet. Or at best, I would be, and this is the best outcome, I would be told that I'm ignorant and misguided and I need to be, you know, educated about how I'm totally wrong about that. So I do find it a little bit galling when some Muslims push this victimhood narrative when they turn a blind eye to the massive level of persecuting and subjugation that goes on within Islamic states towards minorities for sure, Christians and atheists, but also towards minority Muslim groups who they deem as apostates. An example of this would be the Ahmadi people in Pakistan. They're Muslims, but in the eyes of Islamists, they're not real Muslims. So the sectarianism within Islam is rife, and I would say far more Muslims die violently from internal sectarianism than from any other outside force. So the problem is, in Western countries, you get some on the left who actually endorse this mentality that Muslims are victims. As one homogenous bloc, the Muslims are victims. There's about 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. The exact figure, when it comes to religions, we can't be exact on these things, but it's the world's second largest religion by numbers, second to Christianity. It's a major, major world religion. It's spread to pretty much every country. Even countries you wouldn't expect, like Japan, have small Muslim minorities. So, the idea that the Muslims are victims, what does that even mean? It's a grotesque distortion of the reality. What you can say is there are some Muslims who are victims, there's some Muslim groups who are victims, but those who push this narrative and they try to make these false equivalencies. So they'll point, for example, to the French headwear ban. They say all Muslim women cannot wear their hijabs in France. Equals Muslim persecution. Well, France has long-standing secular values that apply to every religion. And there's a debate around the headscarf ban. You know, we've had that debate in the UK. We haven't went down the path of France. Some people, there's mixed feelings on that. I personally have mixed feelings on it. I don't, for example, believe we should ban the hijab. I'd be totally okay with banning the burqa because I think it has no place in our society. You know, the left clamour on Boris Johnson's remarks, even though the majority of Muslims don't actually support the burqa. I mean, that's something that was missing from that whole thing. This idea that it was somehow an attack on Muslim women. And in fact, the Prime Minister, well, I believe he was Foreign Secretary at that time, he was actually arguing against the ban. That's the irony of it. He wasn't even arguing for a ban. So, and in fact, there's another issue that's come up recently. A new piece of legislation in Scotland that's been pushed by um, Scotland's, I believe he's Shadow Home Secretary, Ali Yusuf. Um, Yusuf Ali, I'll just get the man's name correct. Excuse me, I've just made this video spontaneously, so apologies for that. Um, yeah, Humza Yusuf. Apologies to Mr. Yusuf for not getting his name correct the first time. But yeah, he has proposed a new piece of legislation that really, really does need to be scrutinised. Now, actually, National Secular Society welcomed it initially as it replaced Scotland's old blasphemy law, which was barely used. I mean, a lot of this is archaic stuff. Ireland recently got rid of its blasphemy laws. You know, it's incredible to think Western European countries even have blasphemy laws, but it's because the reason most people don't realise it is because they're barely ever enacted. But anyway, on the surface that seemed good. Okay, you're getting rid of an old archaic law. The problem is his new proposition is far more wide sweeping in the definition of what constitutes hate speech and hate crime. Um, and it may well go beyond actually abusing people to the point of them feeling threatened, to actually go to the point of criminalizing thought. And the Spectator was very critical of this. They made an example that under this sort of legislation, Boris Johnson's remarks, which were offensive to many people, well, many Muslims, would actually be considered a hate crime under this new legislation. So I think it needs to be very heavily scrutinised because it will greatly curtail a lot of artistic thought, a lot of freedom of expression. Now, personally, I don't have a problem if you get, for example, a situation where some yobs on a train are abusing a woman in a headscarf or anyone for that matter. Um, that sort of situation, I've no sympathy for those people. I think they should be prosecuted. I think there's no excuse to intimidate or harass fellow members of the public just because of their religion or the way they're dressed. No excuse. Um, so I have no problem if the legislation covered stuff like that. What I do have a problem with is if this legislation is so broad, sweeping, that it basically will be an avenue for de facto blasphemy laws against Islam. Um, Now, Hamza Yusuf and his supporters claim this isn't the case, that there'll still be scope to criticise religion. We'll see. We'll see. So the next time someone in Scotland, a prominent person criticises Islam, let's just see what happens. It may be that it is not as dangerous as it sounds, but we will see. I think whenever this sort of legislation is brought in, it needs to be robustly scrutinised because any sort of notion that criticism or even dislike of a religion is mixed up with hating deterrence really, really needs to be challenged. So I, for example, see a huge difference between someone disliking Islam, the religion, and hating Muslims as individuals. I'm not saying people should hate or dislike Islam, but I think they should have a right to. And, this Pakistani woman that was on the thread, she was trying to claim that, well, we talk about homophobia for the hatred and discrimination of LGBT people. Why not Islamophobia for dislike of Islam? And me and a few other members were trying to point out to her that religion is a choice. So you cannot equate offense to a religion or dislike of a religion with individuals. If you say you find homosexuality to be morally repugnant, not my words, that is a personal swipe at gay people because it's directly about their life. Now, if you say you dislike Islam, Muslims will be offended because they hold it dearly, it's their faith. But ultimately, it is a choice. They they say, for example, that women have a choice in Islam. Okay, if women have a choice in Islam, then you're choosing to be offended because you're choosing that it's something you hold dearly. But ultimately, okay, it's a choice. Prove it. Prove that it's a choice, and prove that you can, take criticism, or you can ignore it. But you cannot make that sort of equivalency comparing hatred or persecution of individuals to hatred or criticism of a religion. It's just a phony comparison. Um, and it infuriates me that some on the left actually play this game. They're not Muslims, the people I'm talking about, but they are regressive leftists. They will say, they will associate the two. They will say that people who criticize Islam are by default bigots. So I really think that people who make that claim need to be robustly challenged. Now, some people who hate Islam may well be anti-Muslim bigots. They may well extend that to hating all Muslims, in which case they should be challenged. But I, for example, dislike many aspects of Islam. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I think Islam, as a religion, has a long way to prove that it is tolerant. I think it's a phony claim to say that Islam is tolerant and peaceful. I think there's peaceful Muslims, but no, I'm sorry, there is the evidence which suggests otherwise. So there has to be a scope and a freedom to dislike religion. There has to be. And the thing about religious types, and you get this from Christian fundamentalists as well, they seem to think that secularism favors atheism simply because it allows atheism to have a voice. That's not the same as favoring atheism, because secularism also gives you religious freedom. Secularism is not a communist system, right? Communists may endorse atheism, but secularism and communism are not one and the same because where you have communism that actually actively persecutes religions, it's totally different from secularism, which is saying, look, you could be religious, just don't impose it on other people. So anyway, to those Muslims out there who really have this victimhood mindset, this victimhood complex, spare me. It's nonsense. That you look at what happens to Christians and atheists and apostates in Islamic countries and tell me that that is equivalent to the situation of Muslims in Britain. It just isn't. And that lie, that propaganda really, really needs to be challenged. And by the way, if that woman is from Pakistan, um, I think she had mentioned that a few times. It's particularly galling for her to be talking about that when she comes from a country where there is endemic persecution of minorities.